Hello, Ed.
How are you? Pleasure to be here.
Ed Seeman. Ed Seeman, the animator.
That's me.
When you were a little kid, did you ever think you'd be known as Ed Seeman, the animator?
No, I didn't, as a matter of fact.
How'd you get into that business?
Oh, well, you're taking me back. I have to rewind the footage now.
You're pretty much of a stand-up comic, aren't you?
I've done a little of that as well. A little singing, a little comedy, a little dancing. And actually, animation was a good way to fuse a lot of my, let's say, genetical impulses, so to speak. After graduating high school, I actually didn't know whether I was going into show business or going to become an artist. So I went to the High School of Music and Art.
Oh, in New York, yeah.
Yeah, in New York. I'm from New York. Let me say that.
Right.
I'm only here a few years. And at that time, my actually singing and art careers had paralleled themselves. So as a little kid, I was drawing, and on the other hand, I was like singing.
But Ed, when you were a little kid,
yeah, sure,
Walt Disney was around.
Was my idol.
He was your idol. He was everybody's idol.
The greatest.
But he was about the only one doing that kind of stuff, wasn't he?
Well, no, not necessarily, because prior to Disney was Max Fleischer.
That's right.
So Fleischer,
yes.
Actually, if you want to go back to Out of the Inkwell, people are very amazed that with Roger Rabbit, they're combining live action and animation.
I want to talk to you about that later on.
We'll get to that.
Do that stuff.
Well, because that's considered state of the art, the art of rotoscoping and interaction between live people and animated people.
Fascinating.
But when you go back to some of the original animation, it was Out of the Inkwell, in which Max Fleischer would actually draw, and he'd have this little bottle of ink. This was black and white, I don't know, before your time.
Oh, long before my time.
And this cartoon character would come out of the inkwell, and he would talk to Max Fleischer. Fleischer actually...
The point is, Ed,
sure,
that there weren't that many opportunities for an animator.
Well, I'm going back further than when I got into the business, if you don't mind.
So when you went into the business...
When I went into the business, everybody was around. There was Terry Toons and Looney Tunes, and where I started, Famous Studios, which was doing Popeye and Casper the Ghost and Little Audrey, and we were the only ones in New York. Yet Terry Toons was in New Rochelle. They were doing Mighty Mouse. That was their big thing.
So when you're
and then California had the Disney and the other things and the Fleischer people.
The way you broke into it then?
Go ahead, sure.
Was what, doing inking or...
Well, again, getting back to when I got out of high school, I was actually trained in all forms of advertising art. So I went out looking for a job, and I was very, very fortunate that I met one art director. You know, very often these guys say, that's very nice, and I'll call you or I'll take your name.
Sure.
This guy was very honest and says, what do you want to do? And I was very shocked. I said, what do you mean what I want to do? I do illustration, I do lettering, I do layouts, I do paste stuff. You know, he says, but what do you do? What do you do? He says, let me show you something. He said, you have some shoe illustration? He brings out a patch. He says, if I want shoe illustration, I got this many shoe illustrators. That's all they do is illustrate shoes. You want to do ties? I got a man who just does ties. You want to do lettering? I got all these books for $2 a word. He says, let me give you some advice. He says, your whole portfolio has one thing that I believe is your forte, and that is your cartoons. Now, I don't know how to get a job as a cartoonist. I just know I like to draw. And getting back to when I was a kid, I would copy comic books and Disney. And I think I was 3 or 4 years old. My mother has drawings, you know, of Donald Ducks I did, you know, age 3 or something like that.
I bet they were adorable. I used to play with the Donald Ducks when I was age 3.
So I did Mickey Mouse and Donald, and those, of course, you know, I wanted to be a cartoonist as well as other things. But you go through art school, and you don't think that there's a job being a cartoonist.
I used to own an advertising agency, Ed.
Oh, great.
And all the years that I owned an advertising agency, I always found it dangerous to use cartoons in my advertising. Now, there are times, you know, everything goes in time periods. So if I were in your position, and maybe you reflected the same way, saying, well, yeah, I love cartoons and I'm good at cartoons, but can I really make a living doing cartoons? Okay, we're going to be back. When we come back, we're going to show you some of the animation this gentleman has done.
We're Mumphrey and Mindy and Max. We want you to get off our backs. We're so glad you found us.
But please go round us.
Just love us and we'll love you back. It's not just our vanities.
We're poor helpless manatees. We're Mumphrey and Mindy and Max.
Right.
How long does it take? I mean, I know that it's not precise. But
Well, yeah. Anyway, I would say it depends on how much is in it, but I would say minimum amount of time is 4 weeks and possibly 8 to 10 weeks at the far end. Something like that took, Mumfre Mindy Max took months and months. Because Disney animation takes a lot more than a limited animation.
You brought a bunch of stuff along with you.
Yeah, I'd like to
Yeah, right. Would you show how these are developed?
Sure, sure. Basically, you start out with a storyboard. If the camera can zoom in on this, we get a little idea of how Mumfre, Mindy, and Max started out. And that's where you actually, it kind of looks like a comic strip at this point.
Who does the storyboard?
I work out a storyboard, but on the other hand, I have various designers depending on styles. This happened to be done by Ray Favada in New York.
What I mean is, do you come up with the idea?
In a commercial, the agency will come up with the idea. This happening to be a public service announcement that I created. I actually came up with a story, wrote the jingle, did some of the voices, but then I do have a designer work on the storyboard, as you know, to work out the plot. From this stage, we get into layouts, which is actually drawings on backgrounds, but I can show you one animated drawing. There are actually 360 of these in the commercial you just saw.
Now, and how long was that commercial?
That commercial was 30 seconds.
30-second commercial. You have 360 individual drawings.
Yeah, there are 720 frames in a 30-second commercial. Since there are 2 frames on every drawing, we wind up with...
That's a little technical.
That's technical. Yeah. Okay, here we go.
But there are 360 individual drawings.
Right, with 3 characters on it.
You go from that
I go from that to, we Xerox it. It used to be inked, but now we Xerox it onto acetate. And you can just see, this is a transparent, you won't see it on TV, piece of acetate that then has to be colored. So then when we color it, we paint it on the back.
The other flip.
Paint it on the back, right. And then what you wind up with is an entire picture. Now the reason it's on acetate is that eventually it gets put over a background. In this case, it's a live action background, but normally that could be a
live action background, you mean it's the photograph?
Yeah, normally animation is done on a cartoon background. But since this...
On a cartoon background.
On a cartoon background. All drawn.
All right.
Right.
But when you have live action...
In this case, we shot the manatees separately, and actually George Montero, a great local underwater cinematographer, went under the water at Key Largo, and I was directing on top of the boat, and he was underneath, you know, running the camera. We were directing all the camera moves to work with the manatees. And then what you're seeing here is actually a still frame taken from the video. So now these cells are on sale.
So let me see if I understand.
We sell this as artwork now.
Oh, I see. Okay, but let me see if I understand this.
Sure.
The background is all on film. So it's 30 seconds of film.
The live action.
The live action.
Live action background's on film.
And then,
no, in this case it was done on video, all video.
All right, so it's done on video.
It's done separately, yeah. It can be on film, it can be on video.
And then the drawings are what, superimposed on those?
The drawings are matted in, yes. They are superimposed in the post-production.
Does that mean that the drawings are then photographed?
Separately.
Separately?
Right.
And do you make a movie or a video out of the drawings and then superimpose the one video on top of the other video?
Exactly. And just as you would mat one, right? Just as Superman flies through a sky, our cartoons fly through water by matting them together.
Okay, we're going to, it's fascinating, isn't it? We're going to learn a lot more about cartooning, about animation and so on from Ed Seeman, so stay with us.